Okay, just as a reminder, note that the audit committee meeting is being recorded, as we just found out. For the convenience of those unable to attend the video conference today, please call the roll.
Yes, John Maderick,
Present.
Nicholas Sudo, Karine Apollon,
Present.
Sarita Scott, Russell Buckley,
Russell's there.
Russell is here, but I think he's
Yeah.
on mute.
I'm an alternate to Karine, who is here on
Right.
behalf of the chancellor, as is John on behalf. John is the principal for Nicholas.
Tom Shepard, Anthony Giordano,
Present, alternate for Tom, I believe.
yes, Gregory Faulkner,
Present.
Marjorie Dienstag, Alan Ong,
Present.
and Allison Hirsch.
President, I have to jump off at 2:30, so Dorsa will be here in my stead.
Okay,
Sure.
thank you.
So,
But I'm also
then-
an alternate, so it doesn't really matter.
okay, so then we have a quorum, I gather.
Yes, we do.
Okay, so then the next item is the approval of the minutes from the January 6th meeting. The minutes have been previously provided via SharePoint. Is there a motion for unanimous consent on approval of the minutes?
I wasn't on the board and I wasn't at the meeting, so I'd like to abstain.
Okay, well, we don't have a motion, so,
Motion from John.
John, is there a second?
Second the motion.
Second motion, the motion was for unanimous consent. Is there objection to unanimous consent for approval of the minutes of January 6th?
Yes, one abstention.
Well, that's not an objection. Do you object to the minutes being approved? Okay, without objection, then the minutes for January 6th are approved with, your abstention.
Perfect.
Okay, the next item is the election of the permanent chair. Then could you kind of give an overview of what the responsibilities are, and then we'll take nominations for the chairmanship so we can move forward with the meeting?
So the position of the chair will rotate annually. A new chair will be elected at the second meeting of the year for the audit committee meetings. It's expected that the chair will have knowledge of changing issues within the public sector, pension administration, enterprise risk management, internal controls, and in general, the nature of internal audit and the internal audit environment. And then we also expect the chair to have working knowledge of BERS risks profile and the business priorities of BERS.
Okay, so having said that, is there anyone who wishes to nominate themselves or volunteer, or are there nominations for chair?
I'd like to nominate Effie Zachary, if that's possible.
So I believe we skipped the motion to consider electing the chair.
Okay, is there unanimous consent for motion to consider moving to election of the chair?
So moved.
Second, is there objection to unanimous consent? Motion carries. Let's move forward with nominations then. Are there any nominations for the office of chair? Or
Yes.
does anyone wish to volunteer?
Yes, if possible, I would like to nominate Effie Zachary as chair.
Yeah.
Greg, I would like to volunteer if I'm needed.
You're needed. I think Effie is, as it turns out, it has to be a member of the committee, which I wasn't, I have to be a member of the committee. So we have one nominee. Are there any additional nominees? Going once, going twice? Okay, do we need to formally vote, or do we just, Alex, how do we actually conduct the election?
I think you can vote, and you don't have to do it by roll call unless there's disagreement.
Okay, so is there unanimous consent that John Matarich become the chair of the audit committee? Is there a second to that motion?
Yes, second.
Actually, is there a motion and then a second? So there's a motion and then a second. Okay, is there any objection? With that objection, John, congratulations, and the meeting is now yours.
Oh, thank you so
Alex,
much.
did I do that correctly?
Yes.
Okay, I want to make sure I'm legal here. Okay, congratulations.
Congrats, John.
Thanks, guys.
Congratulations, John.
All right. So I think I know how to do this. So I did it for a few years as the co-chair. So next item on the agenda is item number 4, the executive director's update. Sandy, would you like to share any remarks with us?
I don't really have anything to share that I wouldn't have shared last night, so I'd like to accelerate the meeting. If there are any questions for me, I'd be happy to respond.
Thank you, Sandy. Any questions for Sandy? Okay, I don't see any hands up or hear any. The next item on the agenda is item number 5, the internal audit director's update. Aday?
Yes, I am sharing my screen. Is everyone able to see that?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So today I'm going to cover the audits that have been completed since the last audit committee meeting, which was held in January. I will briefly talk about audits that are currently ongoing, and I will give the audit committee an update on the status of remediation of prior audit findings. The first audit here today is the IT logical and physical access security audit. We actually have with us Stacy Gill from Baker Tilly, who is going to present the results of this audit. Stacy?
Yes. Hi, everyone. So we completed the IT logical and physical access security audit. The objectives of this audit were around, one, from a logical access perspective, making sure that there were proper controls around, accessing applications in terms of authenticating to those applications, passwords being properly, kind of restricted, there being proper and approved levels of administrative or privilege level access. And then also we looked at, from a user account management perspective, how users were added, changed, or terminated from those applications. And then from a physical access perspective, ensuring that both office spaces as well as data centers and network closets were properly secured to only authorized individuals. So as far as our in-scope applications that were reviewed, we identified some of the key systems being used by the organization that included CPMS, the pension management system, NetSuite, the financial application, Kofax, the records management application, and then lastly, the shared departmental network drives. So we have identified some findings here, which I'll go through from a high level. Please feel free to interject if there's any questions or comments on any of these items. The first item that we noted was related to shadow IT across the organization. So this is referring to IT applications being procured and managed by individual departments across the organization versus those processes flowing through IT so that there is, the IT department having a hold on all systems that are being used across the organization. So what we had noted was that, there really isn't sort of a formal process in place for IT to kind of govern that process of acquiring and managing applications. So from there, our recommendation was really to implement a policy that would dictate the acquisition, implementation, and administration of IT applications so that IT as a department is involved in all phases of that procurement and can provide support to those departments throughout the process. Currently, the status of management's action plan is that they are in the process of reviewing and updating an IT policy to make sure that is incorporated so that IT will be included on any procurement related to IT applications and services. The second item that we noted is related to physical access to the data centers. So that includes data centers and a network closet within the Brooklyn office location, as well as the data center within Manhattan. Within Brooklyn, there were some findings in terms of, no kind of physical locked doors or restrictions to that data center. There didn't appear to be kind of active surveillance and no procedures in place for visitors to the data center there in Brooklyn. And I will note a big reason for this is that it was currently under construction because that data center is being moved to another location. However, there is still active servers within that data center space. For Manhattan, there was slightly more minor, but whenever the doors were propped open for the Manhattan data center, there were no alarm notifications. So essentially that door could just be propped open for an extended period of time without anyone recognizing that unless they, of course, walked by. For the recommendation here is that, physical access should be restricted using the existing badge system within Brooklyn, until the time of the active servers being moved to the other location. In addition, that there be a request to activate surveillance cameras, as well as requiring authorized escorts to any visitors to the data center and maintaining records of that. In addition, for Manhattan, it was recommended to configure those alarm configurations so that if the doors are left open for, exceed a reasonable interval of time, that someone gets notified. The action plan from management for this, from facilities management currently, the team is working on those notifications for Manhattan to make sure that those are received. And then in addition to that, there be, I think there was an issue or a concern that the Brooklyn data center is managed by the DOE. So from that perspective, they're planning to reach out to request that, but again, not fully in BERS control. The third item is related to physical access to the office space itself. For the Brooklyn office space, there was a finding noted where doors are left unlocked currently. Badging is not being used or kind of restricted due to co-locating with the DOE at this time. Although those are locked after hours, during office hours, those are open, but noting that there is security at, entering the building at the first floor. For the Manhattan office space, we had noted in our review of access that there was one employee that had left the organization that still had office access. And then additionally that the main entrance doors were propped open at a certain point in time, and there was no alarm that was triggered related to that. So our recommendations there is similarly restricting access to the office space using the existing badge system and making sure to kind of formalize that process for requesting, revoking, and documenting, any terminated employees that no longer need access. additionally performing a physical access review to ensure, again, that those individuals are removed if it doesn't happen as part of the normal process, and then also to configure alarm notifications there. So as far as the status here, there's currently a policy that's being updated related to offboarding, and they are kind of in communications with the vendor to implement those door alerts. From the facilities management perspective, they are also reviewing that process and planning to require that employees must use their badge to enter going forward. The fourth item related to environmental hazard prevention and facility management. This is still related to the data center and just making sure that the conditions are properly appropriate to kind of ensure, that critical IT systems are not damaged or destroyed. So some things that we had noted that aren't currently in place, things like heat and humidity not being monitored, no safeguards in place to protect from water leaks and flooding, no safeguards in terms of we could not determine that there were active safeguards in terms of fire suppression, detection, and regular maintenance related to those items. And then lastly, we did note that the temperature on the HVAC system had exceeded what the alarm thresholds had been set to, but no alarm or notifications were triggered or sent during that time. So as far as kind of management's response and status of their action plan, they are planning to request that these safeguards be put in place for 65 Court Street. And then for Manhattan, there was the configuration that had been updated to ensure that alerts would be sent out upon those thresholds being exceeded. Next, related to IT equipment maintenance, similarly, there was no formal policy in place for maintaining that equipment that supports those critical IT systems. And within the Brooklyn data center, there is no maintenance of equipment that's currently being performed. From that perspective, for Brooklyn, the management response was again that's managed by the DOE, so BERS does not really have control over those items, so no action to be taken there. The next finding, removal, storage, and disposal of IT assets. We noted that there wasn't a full inventory of physical IT assets, and there were not periodic reviews being performed to account for all IT assets. Within the status of management's action plan, they have actually completed an inventory of physical IT assets within the Fresh Service platform, which was a new application that had been acquired to manage those items. And they are in the process of looking to implement a periodic review as well. The next finding related to password security settings. Just in kind of comparison with best practices, we had noted password expiration for CPMS did not exist. For NetSuite, the recommended lockout for invalid login attempts was not currently in place. It was locking out after 6 invalid attempts versus 5. And then specific to the network and Active Directory, similarly, it was configured to lock out after 10 invalid attempts versus the recommended 5. So currently, these items have been resolved for NetSuite. For CPMS, management has agreed, but that item is still outstanding. And then for Active Directory, the management response was that, again, the DOE is maintaining that password policy. So BERS does not have control over those items. Next is new user access administration. We had noted that there was not a formal process around user access for Kofax, NetSuite, and the shared network folders. In addition, kind of the recommended sort of segregation of duties within that process couldn't be confirmed. And then also separately, we noted that Kofax actually didn't require any user credentials to log in. And so, once they were authenticated through the network, they had direct access to that application. So our recommendation was, again, to formalize that process for requesting, approving, and documenting new hire or modified access, making sure that the responsibilities for approving user access and provisioning those access rights are segregated, and then to enable Kofax to require authentication within the application itself. So as far as management's action plan, they are planning to put that in place in terms of formalization for Kofax, for NetSuite, and then also for the shared network folders. And they plan to kind of implement user credential login for Kofax. The next finding relates to revocation of user access. So again, for Kofax, NetSuite, and the shared network drives, there's no formalized process for requesting, revoking, or documenting sort of that termination of access. And then we had noted within CPMS and NetSuite that there were some separated employees whose access was not revoked in a timely manner. From a management response standpoint, again, this is something similar to the prior item that is being worked on across applications. And then the last item is related to user access reviews. So CPMS out of the in-scope applications was the only one that had a process in place. Within that process, we did note that just as an improvement there, that sign off and evidence for completion of the review of those user access reviews should be documented and retained. And then there was no process in place for reviewing access to Kofax, NetSuite, shared network folders. And then additionally for JP Morgan Chase, this was something that we had looked at as part of a prior audit, that there was a user that had wire payment permissions within the system. We did note that wire payments are not being made by BERS, so the risk was a little lower there, but still noted that those access permissions should be revoked since they are not actually needed by that individual. And that has since been remediated. In terms of the updates for CPMS and the other applications, that is currently in process to put a formal process in place and to update kind of the sign off and evidence from a CPMS perspective. So that was a lot. I guess, does anyone have any questions on any of those findings?
Okay, sounds like
Over
we're
to
good
you.
to move on. Thank you very much, Stacy. So I'm going to move on to the next audit here. All right, so this audit was an audit of the takedown process for the variable annuity fund. The audit was conducted at Sandy's request, and our objectives were to assess the accuracy of the takedown calculation and to determine compliance with applicable legislation. We also wanted to review the process to see if there were any improvements that we could recommend. Just to give some background, so the takedown is the process by which BERS captures the net movement within the variable annuity fund. The variable annuity fund consists of both QPP and TDA funds and is administered and invested on our behalf by the Teachers' Retirement System. So that calculation I just talked about, where the net movement is determined, is usually done on a monthly basis. And what usually happens is that, there's an aggregation of all transactions by all BERS participants, so active members and retirees. All their transactions that impact the variable account are aggregated. So any transactions that increase the variable are aggregated against transactions that reduce the variable fund in order to determine what that net movement amount is for the month. Now, if the month's activities result in an increase in the variable fund, BERS will send a check to TRS to increase the net asset value of the variable fund. But if the month's activities result in a decrease in the variable fund balance, the reverse happens. BERS will send TRS a request for payment, and TRS will send a check to BERS. Now, as far as the calculation, this is usually done within the Fiscal Operations Department. Prior to CPMS, there was a much simpler calculation for them. Prudential provided the takedown inputs, and they just plugged in the numbers and they were done. But since the rollout of CPMS, Fiscal Ops has become responsible for obtaining, collating, and gathering all the data that is needed for this calculation. And I will get into that as we talk about the findings. As far as our approach to this audit, we did what we always do. We reviewed any prior audit reports, process narratives. In this case, we looked at applicable sections of the BERS rules and regs, as well as the education law. We held process interviews and walkthroughs with BERS staff. We had one meeting with TRS staff from their accounting department. We looked at the takedown inputs like the queries, the payroll files, the vouchers, and the voucher reports. While doing this, we ran into some difficulty in terms of the data that was available, the manner in which it was available, and so we had to pivot some of our testing to focus on the takedown inputs that were most material and that we had adequate data for. Before I get into the findings, I just want to take a quick pause and see if anyone has any questions on the variable annuity fund or the takedown process. Okay, so during the audit, we noted 4 findings. The first one relates to non-compliance with applicable regulations. So the BERS rules and regs and the education law requires that BERS have a contract in place to invest and administer the variable annuity fund with whomever that custodian is. And in our case, it's TRS, and it's been TRS for a very long time, as far as we all remember. The law also states that the contract has to be reviewed and renewed every 5 years, and that it has to be filed with the New York State Superintendent of Insurance within 30 days prior to the effective date of the contract. So what we did find during the audit was that there was no evidence that a contract existed. We inquired from BERS staff, from our investment staff, from TRS, and no one had a copy of this contract. No one could confirm that the contract did exist. And as a result, there were no filings, no evidence of filings with the New York State Superintendent of Insurance as required. And obviously there was no review. So if there's no contract, there's no review. So the required 5-year review and renewal was not happening. So as far as our recommendations for this finding, we recommended that BERS formalize its relationship with TRS in a contract, and that the contract should include the terms for administering the variable annuity funds, the common investment of those funds with TRS, as well as the terms for renewal of the contract. We also recommended that the required filings be done with the New York State Superintendent of Insurance. And then we also recommended that BERS ensures that the contract states what BERS's desired level of transparency is required from whomever that custodian is going to be. And we'll get into that a little bit in one of the other findings. From management's response, they did agree with the finding, and they agreed that a formal agreement was required, and they plan to reach out to TRS Legal and begin discussion on drafting the contract. So that was finding number one. Finding number two has to do with the takedown calculation itself, where we did note some timing inconsistencies and delays, as well as inconsistencies in the data. So when we went into this audit, we had mapped out a scope period of about 10 years going to 2012, from 2012 to 2022. But as we went into the audit, we realized that some of the data that we needed was not available, or was not available in the way that we needed it. So for example, some payroll files were not there. Some loan records were not being displayed as fixed and variable components. So we had to sort of pivot our testing to accommodate some of that. And that was a challenge. And then as far as the timing delays, we noted that there were inconsistencies. So the takedown per process is supposed to be done on a monthly basis, but between fiscal year 2013 and 2017, there was a 2-month lag in the calculation. And between fiscal year 2018 and 2021, there were times where it was done once a year, and so there was up to a 12-month lag. And then from fiscal year 2022 onwards, the calculations were done monthly. So what we did note with that is that there were no adjustments made to account for those timing lags. And given the fact of the value of the fund and the rates of return, we expected that there would be some material swings in the net asset value that wasn't being accounted for, when the takedown was being delayed. So we did recommend that BERS should consider procuring a third-party service provider that would independently review the variable annuity fund program, review how BERS is accounting for these funds, and that would mean taking a look at historical takedown calculations of the unit value, the number of units, and the dollar value of those timing delays that we noted. We also recommended that BERS should periodically reconcile the reports that it gets from TRS with its own internal accounting reports, so that any discrepancies are quickly identified and remediated. And then lastly, to ensure oversight of the process, we recommended that a high-level summary of the takedown be included in the monthly reporting to the Board of Trustees. As far as management's response, they did agree with the finding. Fiscal Ops is currently having discussions around reviewing and improving the takedown process. They also plan to explore the options of hiring a third-party service provider to review the takedown process. And for that, they're gonna, consult with the executive office and the investment strategy department. And they also are going to now include a copy of the takedown report with the board reporting starting in July of 2023. So finding number 3 has to do with the manual data sourcing and the calculation of the takedown. So like I said earlier, when BERS rolled out CPMS and the responsibility moved over to the fiscal operations department, CPMS is our ERP system. It's where all transactions are now processed, effective 2017, and the transactions are recorded in CPMS as well. So as I said, the takedown involves aggregating all of those transactions that have been processed in CPMS. Now, the problem is that those transactions that have been processed in CPMS is unable to provide reliable reports of said transactions. So Fiscal Ops has to rely on manual data sources. So they're relying on queries, they're relying on payroll files mostly from the DOE and the other employers that we have. And these reports are being provided to them mostly by the data analytics department, and they're getting them in massive Excel files. So this manual process, if you will, makes the calculation quite complex. It's very time consuming, and it leaves the risk for data integrity issues and human error. So what we recommended was that, well, Fiscal Ops did let us know during the audit that they are currently reviewing design specifications to have the takedown reports configured into CPMS. So we recommended that while that's going on, Fiscal Ops should ensure that this new functionality that's being provided will alleviate the need for manual sourcing of the data as much as possible, and also that the report structures and templates that are going to be configured into CPMS be made such that they are dynamic and able to be adapted as business needs change. So Fiscal Ops agreed with us as far as the finding. They are in conversation with Vitech to include these additional parameters that were recommended, and the ask is being reviewed by Vitech. So the last finding has to do with the unit value calculation and support for that calculation. Just to sort of explain, so variable units are the currency by which the variable fund is accounted for in member accounts. So our members, whether active or retired, may have variable units in their accounts, in their participant accounts. Now, the unit value is given to us by TRS every month, and that unit value is applied to every member's account at the same time every month to determine what the value of their variable portion of their account would be for that month, and on, and it changes every month. So just for perspective, BERS processed 63,000 transactions in January using the unit value. And so due to the volume and impact of the unit value, it's considered a high risk item. And so we wanted to, do some testing around that to see if we could provide any assurance as to the accuracy and validity of the calculation. We requested some data. We had a meeting with TRS. They, walked us through how they do the calculation, and we asked them to give us additional information on the reports that support those numbers that we saw on their screen. So what they normally do is they will send Fiscal Ops a one-pager that just shows the amounts that went into the calculation. So we wanted to see the support behind those numbers. They did not provide us the files that we requested, so we were not able to do any testing around the accuracy of the unit value calculation. So what we did recommend is that BERS prioritize independent verification of the unit value. We felt that it was important that BERS is able to verify that the unit value that it's applying to thousands of accounts and using to process thousands of transactions is accurate. In order to do that, they would need to have access to the underlying data. So we did recommend that they try to work with TRS and try to get that data on a regular basis. We also recommended that when BERS draws up that contract with TRS and whoever will become the custodian down the line, that they add a clause or some language around the level of transparency that BERS wants and its right to access or request any data or information pertaining to the variable fund. As far as management's response, they did agree with our findings. The information strategy department is going to work with legal and the executive office to help draft the agreement between TRS and BERS and determine what type of information BERS would like to receive. And the Information Strategy Department is also currently working with investment consultants on an RFP for the variable fund that will outline the level of service and the type of information that BERS will receive going forward. So that was everything for this audit. If there are any questions, I'll be happy to answer them.
Just what is the size of the VAF?
So in fiscal year 2022, it was about $660 million. In fiscal year 2021, it was $828 million.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Are there any other questions? Okay. All right, so next I'm just gonna quickly run through the audits that are currently ongoing. So for the internal audits, we currently have the tax deferred annuity audit ongoing. We are currently reporting, and I should be able to bring that to the audit committee at the next meeting. We are also looking at travel and conference expenses at BERS. We are also in the reporting phase of that audit, and I should have that at the next audit committee meeting. We recently kicked off a payroll procedures audit, which is one that's is required by the Controller's Office, and we do on an annual basis, and we are in early field work on that audit. We also have recently kicked off an audit of QPP refunds, so qualified pension plan refunds, and we are also in early field work. So those are the internal audits that are currently ongoing. As far as external audits, we are currently under audit by the Office of the Controller. I believe we're in field work there. They've been requesting information for us and we've been responding. They recently reached out this week and we have something due back to them on Friday. So that's where we are with that one. And then the other external audit is the audit from DFS that was kicked off in 2019. But we recently heard from them within the last, I want to say month or so, and they did mention that they are working on a report. So we are expecting that report. And one other one that's not listed here that will soon be kicked off is the annual financial statement audit by Grant Thornton. That will be kicked off sometime this month, I believe. If there are any questions here, I'll be happy to.
The controller's audit, where do you think we are with that? And does the controller have purview over our board governance structure?
I believe that they do. I don't have on the top of my head what statute, but when they did send us the engagement letter, they made a reference to their authority to conduct this audit. So I'm not privy to their internal processes, but I believe that we're in field work based on what they're requesting. They've had a few meetings with employees from fiscal ops, investments, some of the board members, and I believe, well, with myself also. And they've requested some information. We've gotten back on them. They recently sent something last Friday. They want it back this Friday. So that's exactly where we are at this point.
John, yeah, can I ask John, can you opine on that?
Yeah, I mean, I can't opine on the audit, but with respect to governance, that's covered in the education code.
But also, I mean, I would just say also section 93 of the charter.
Yeah, we don't have any. I mean, to my knowledge, this is a creature of the legislature and the education code, not a creation of the board.
I got you. Just checking.
Okay, so next I'm going to quickly talk about the status of prior audit findings. As you will see on the chart on your top right, it shows the findings that have been remediated since the last audit committee meeting, which was held in January. Since then, 9 findings have been fully remediated, and that includes 3 high-risk rated findings and 6 moderate risk rated findings. And currently we have 41 that are currently open and they are either in the process of being remediated or not started. That I will touch on in the next slide. And then the chart at the bottom right shows the remediation status from an overall standpoint. So of all high-risk findings, 48% have been fully remediated, while 52% are in progress or scheduled for remediation. And as for the medium risk rated findings, 53% are fully remediated, while 44% are in progress or scheduled. Now, some of the recently remediated findings would be the retirement reserves fix. I don't know if you recall in 2019 when there was a change to the actuarial loan and option reduction factors. BERS had to implement that change and then retroactively correct pensions that were issued. The process was quite lengthy, and then the last piece of remediating that was fixing the retirement reserves in our system, and that was just recently concluded successfully. Inventory of hardware assets was recently completed. BERS recently released an overtime policy for staff, and they are currently reviewing overtime approvals. This was something that we had noted in a prior audit, and now that we are working on a repeat audit of this area, we are also going to be looking into those overtime approvals as well. And then as far as the issues that we noted with the goals and performance measures, they are being addressed via what BERS calls this EFC program, Employee Feedback Cycle program. And it was extended first to the managers and then to the supervisors and now to the staff. It was actually introduced at the prior town hall meeting. For leadership development, there are a few programs that are ongoing. So there's the Sandy's Corner series where we meet with Sandy periodically, and sometimes there's an expert there to discuss development for managers and related topics. And then there's also the leadership coaching program that's currently ongoing through McLean. There's the management fundamentals training that was recently extended to supervisors. And as far as accountability, progressive discipline is the tool by which BERS wants to ensure that, and it's been ongoing and has been applied several times, I noted. And then for the call center, they are now fully staffed. Fingers crossed that they stay staffed, but it was quite an undertaking for them to be able to find the talent that they needed. If there are any questions on this slide, I'll be happy to take it before I move on. Okay, so chart number 3 on the right shows you the distribution of the high, open, and medium risk findings. And this is done by operational area. Just looking at the chart, so around 40% of the findings that are open were high risk rated, while around 60% were medium risk rated at the time of the audit. And a majority, around 57% of the open findings will fall under the operational areas of compliance and information technology. So that's where the bulk of the findings reside. As far as some of the high-risk findings that are still open, number one is procurement. There's been some setbacks with that because the individual that was responsible for setting up the framework around procurement left BERS, and BERS is actively trying to recruit for that role. Manual financial reporting process is still ongoing. Fiscal Ops, I know, is in talks with Vitech, and they had done some testing around the reports, and they continue to do so in the hopes that the reports can be rolled out prior to next fiscal year. For the issue of outstanding checks that was noted earlier, in a prior audit, Fiscal Ops is currently having conversations with operations. Sandy is also having conversations with them to sort of map out a plan to resolve the backlog of the checks that are outstanding, as well as a way to move forward and address those more on a real-time basis. As far as defaulted loans, cleanup is ongoing. This is happening within operations, and their priority after that is to work on cleaning up SCP and arrears within the cash account. Privileged assets management is still ongoing. BERS is trying to get tools that it can use to manage access for privileged accounts. And for the data recovery capabilities, BERS is exploring cloud options for offsite backup. And then lastly, when it comes to velocity post-implementation review, this is yet to happen and is still pending. And on the next slide, I'll talk quickly about some target dates for some of these high-risk findings. If there are any questions here, I'll be happy to take them before moving on. No questions, okay. So this is the last chart, and it shows you the overall remediation progress of high and medium risk rated findings across the organization. So for the high risk findings, 33% are in progress, and remediation has yet to start for 18%, while 49% are fully remediated. And then as far as the medium risk rated findings, 28% are in progress. Remediation has yet to start for 16%, while the remaining 56% are fully remediated. As far as progress and target dates, procurement, they're hoping to have everything in place as far as their policies, procedures, and their processes in June of this year. I do anticipate some delays there, but for now, that's the target completion date. And as I said earlier, for the financial reports, they're hoping to have that configured into CPMS fully by June 2023. For the cleanup of defaulted loans, the target date is October of this year. And as far as the call center, they're still working on updating their knowledge document that they're hoping will help the customer service reps as they're on the phone with the members. That's scheduled to be completed by May. And for the offsite options that I mentioned earlier, IT is hoping to have that done this month, actually. And for their PAM tool, September is the target date, and is the target date for the policy, the Privileged Access Management Policy, and then their PAM tool is scheduled to be rolled out in March of next year. So this is everything I have for the committee today. If there are any questions or comments, we'll be happy to take those. Okay, John, it looks like we are back to the agenda.
Thank you, Ade. I appreciate it. If anybody would like to have any committee discussion, I'm gonna need a motion. If not, I'm just going to move on to adjourning the meeting. Would anybody like to have a discussion? If so, please make a motion. I don't hear any, so the next meeting for the audit committee of the BERS Audit Committee is scheduled for the third quarter of 2023 and will be communicated to all committee members and invitees. Can I have a motion to adjourn?
You're a great
So moved.
motion. Yeah, moved.
And a second, the second was from Greg.
Yes.
All those in favor? Aye, John.
Tony.
Hi, Greg.
Any opposed or abstentions? Motion carries. Thank you, everybody. We are adjourned. Have a good day, and I'll see you
Thank
next
you.
time.
Everybody.
Thank you.
Right.
Thank you. Bye-bye.